Welcome to the Journey to CFO webinar with Spendflo. My name is Nivas, Ravichandran, and I head marketing for Spendflo. Thank you so much once again for joining us on a Thursday for this webinar. I have with me Aditya Agarwal, who's the CFO of Cleartrip. For those of you who don't know Cleartrip, I'll be a little surprised if you don't know, but I think they're India's one of the largest travel booking platforms, and they've grown significantly. And I'm a huge fan of their entire UI and the experience. I think I know this is being recorded, but yeah, I'm just going to say that, saying they have a really good experience in comparison to some of the other like even the global platforms that I've used. So before we jump into the actual webinar and I give you an introduction about Aditya, I'll just quickly talk about why we're putting together this series called The Journey to CFO, right? CFO as a title, I think has become a lot more crucial in 2023, right? Like I think prior to that, at least there was set like certain responsibilities, but I think 2023 has just thrown an entirely new set of challenges for CFOs and finance leaders, of course. And I think the entire laundry list of challenges, right, like heading into 2023 is just crazy. So I think just as our part of bringing together the finance community for them to just create a space for leaders to open up their playbooks and share their expert perspectives. And also just how are they getting ahead of the curve, right? Like I don't know how to be prepared for either a 2023 or 2024. I think gone are the days of annual planning. I think it's mostly quarterly planning or monthly planning. Aditya, love to hear from you on that as well. But this is our way of paying it back to the community. And we have Aditya with us from Cleartrip. So Aditya is the CFO of Cleartrip. And I think one of the very interesting things is he came from a corp dev background, or more of a mergers and acquisitions / private equity background, right? A seasoned professional with over 10 years of private equity background, has worked with Goldman Sachs, Standard Chartered, TPG Capital. So Aditya, would love to hear your version of the story. And first of all, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you so much, Nivas, for that, for so many kind words about Cleartrip and about myself, and for having me here. Thanks a lot to you and to the Spendflo team. Thanks a lot to all the participants who have joined. I'm overwhelmed, right? I think when you told me about the number of registrations and participants. So I am a little bit nervous, but I'm looking forward to a very engaging chat with you and with the rest of the participants. And I think this the series, that the CFO series, is a very interesting initiative. So thanks for having me here. Yeah, maybe I can start right with my journey and how sort of I have reached where I have reached so far. Like you pointed out, I started off in a very different space, right? So I was in the private equity world, which is where I did the first 10 years of my career post my B school, was in the private equity world. And obviously, there is overlap in the sense that they are both adjacent to finance. But otherwise, it's a very different space, and you are working in a very different setup. Typically, the teams that I've worked for would be, say, small teams, 8 people, 10 people. The kind of work is very different, where you are expected to make investments, right, and make them work, make returns, hopefully. So I did that for 10 years across a variety of funds, in different geographies, in different asset classes. And before I switched to Cleartrip, right, which was 8 years ago. So my career, I can sort of divide into 10 years of private equity and 8 years of being with Cleartrip. And there were a couple of triggers for me to move into this role. One, I felt that one of the great advantages of private equity or investment banking or consulting is that it gives you a very wide range of exposure. You get a lot of breadth of experience. You're looking at hundreds of different companies in tens of different sectors, in different stages of their journey, right? But I felt that I wanted a lot more depth as well in a particular sector or a particular company. which by definition, right, when you're looking at a lot of different companies in different sectors, you cannot really develop that kind of depth. So that was one of the triggers. The second trigger was that I wanted to do something in the consumer internet space. I felt that we are sort of in the middle of a once in a generation kind of a shift where lots of industries are getting dislocated. And I wanted to experience that from inside, right? Obviously, I was able to see that as an investor as well, but I wanted to experience that from inside. So that's when I came across this opportunity, and I was glad to take it up. Within Cleartrip, also I actually started off as a corp dev M&A guy, and over the course of my journey at Cleartrip, this role has expanded into a CFO role as well. And this was also a function of the circumstances, right? So this was also a period where we went through a lot as a company and as an industry. Obviously, we are in travel, like you said, and with COVID, all the entire economy was impacted, but I would say travel was probably one of the sectors that was most impacted. Overnight, we went from wherever we were to zero, and at the same time, we had to handle a lot more customer requests, amendments, cancellations, refunds, right? So it was sort of a double whammy where revenue goes to zero and costs suddenly need to spike. And we were also at that time going through a change of control, right? So we were in conversations with Flipkart, and we are obviously now part of Flipkart, which is we are very happy to be part of Flipkart. It's one of the most loved consumer internet brands in the country. So during this period is when, during COVID is when I took on the CFO role as well. This was the time when all of us, right, in Cleartrip, we had to really adapt. We had to take on multiple responsibilities to be able to cope with what we were going through. As part of that, I was very happy to get this opportunity to take on the CFO role, which is where now I've been for the last 3 years.
Got it. Got it. Aditya, so I think this is a question that's probably running through a lot of people, right? Like, how does the board or the leadership, right, like appoint a CFO, right? Because especially there's VP of finance, there's head of finance, there's director of finance. But I think obviously you can say, hey, you know what, the title title is just a name, but I think there is a catch to the word a CFO, right? What does it really take, or how did I mean, you don't necessarily have to reveal the entire thing, but what did they look for, or what do you think the board or the leadership looks for in a CFO, Aditya?
Yeah, I think maybe that question should go to board members, but I can try and give my perspective, right? And so you're right. I think obviously finance is part of the title, and finance is the key skill set that's required. But it goes beyond that. I think for any CXO role, be it CFO, be it any other CXO role, the expectation is that people will go beyond their specialization, beyond their area of specialization, beyond their function, beyond their team, and will be able to take a much larger, much wider macro view, much more strategic view of where the company is going, where it is required to go, and bring that strategic perspective, right? I think it's very, very important. Technical skills obviously are a hygiene factor; they go without saying. But a lot of that work actually gets taken care of if you have a good team, right? So if you have a good team, you don't need to really worry about some of the basic technical skills that the function requires, because obviously you will not be able to handle the day-to-day duties of a lot of those aspects. So you need a very strong team. So I think the board or anybody who's making such a decision, right, will be looking at whether somebody who's joining the leadership group, the CXO group, is able to think strategically, is able to think laterally, is able to take the company to the next phase, right, which could involve strategic choices. It could involve organic versus inorganic decisions. It could involve capital raising decisions and so on. So these are more, these are not day-to-day events that happen, right, in the life of a company. And the board would have some sense of where the company headed. And for that phase, they would be maybe looking at certain skill sets depending on where they want the company to go.
Aditya, so I think obviously 2023 and obviously COVID also, right? Like I think COVID was probably the bigger challenge for Cleartrip. I would say 2023 is probably a challenge for the entire industry, but COVID was probably a bigger challenge, right? Like what went through in some of the trenches, right? Like obviously some of them are decisions that you cannot entirely disclose. We're absolutely fine with that. But what's the mindset of a CFO during those like very critical times, right? Like what goes through Aditya?
Yeah, I think, see, it was definitely a period of crisis. There is no shying away from that. And see, in moments like this, you need absolute clarity. There will be a lot of conflicting emotions. A lot of tough decisions will need to be taken, which will impact not only the company, but it will impact people and families also. And these are people that you've worked with for a long time. You build those teams. But I think that's where the clarity comes in. If you are clear of what is the right thing to do for the company at that point of time, then I think the decision actually becomes quite simple in these situations, because it's almost like the survival is at stake. And therefore, in any tough decisions, if you have very clearly what the goal is, and in this case, the goal cannot be clearer, right? That the company needs to survive. It's not a secret. I think we were very lucky to obviously get acquired by Flipkart. But yeah, leading up to that, we had to really tighten our belts. We had to, and again, if I look at it beyond just the finance function, right? Even as a company, this was a time when we had to really also respond to the customer, because the customers were also going through a lot of uncertainty. Rules for flying were changing on the go. You didn't know whether you'll be able to take a flight or not, whether the rules will change, whether there will be a lockdown, not a lockdown, and whether the airlines will compensate you or not. So we had to be very agile to be able to respond to customers. We had to also innovate in terms of, we were able to come up with some products which allowed customers a lot more flexibility to be able to make amendments and cancellations. And all this while we were also having to really tighten our belts internally. So it was a very difficult period, but I'm very proud of how we've come out of it, and proud of the entire team of how we've been able to come out of it.
Right. Absolutely. Kudos to Cleartrip as well as Flipkart on this, Aditya. I'm going to like slightly derail and take a question from the audience, right? I was actually reading a LinkedIn post which said, hey, how many minutes in a meeting or a conversation do you bring up Gen AI, right? Like as a word. And I think at 4:07 we had the first question. So I was like, okay, you know what? We were 7 minutes in and we had the question. So there's obviously the question is on Gen AI. How do you feel a CFO's job is going to be affected by the use of generative AI in coming days? What all aspects you feel is going to be impacted? This is by Rajiv Moti. So yeah, Aditya, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rajiv, for the question. See, I don't have a great answer, right? And it's an evolving situation, obviously. And I think we are very cognizant that if I were to think about it, there are every 10 years, 15 years, there is some transformative technology that happens, and maybe that pace is accelerating, right? But few years back, say now, it feels like we've always had mobile phones and we've always been functioning on mobile phones. But 10 years ago, right? And Cleartrip has been there for 17 years. 10 years ago, the entire business was on desktops, right? And now it's flipped the other way around. 75% of our traffic comes through mobile channels. So and I was not with Cleartrip at that point of time, but there was a shift that happened. And at that time, Cleartrip was one of the first companies to recognize that shift, not just in travel, right, but across the e-commerce space in India, and come up with the mobile app versions. And I think that stood us in good stead for a long time. So this is one such moment potentially where we are looking at transformative technology. Definitely in travel, I think there are very interesting use cases for Gen AI. Whether it lives up to its potential remains to be seen. I think in the last few years, there have been other potentially promising technologies, be it crypto and so on, which have at least so far not fired. You don't know whether they will or not. So there have been such false alarms or such hopes recently which have not played out, but this truly feels transformative. How exactly it's going to impact the finance function, I don't know. But my expectation is that it will, like most of these technological changes, It will improve the efficiency of the function. It will allow a lot more automation. It will reduce a lot of the manual work that we still do. While we've come a long way, I think there is still a long way to go. And this is a technology which can accelerate that shift towards automation, which at least in finance, it's still a dire need, is what I would say. Where we deal with sort of very, very large volume of data, very large volume of transactions. This is essentially one way, right, where you can tap into that in a much, much more intuitive, user-friendly way. So I'm watching this closely to see how this plays out. But more than finance, I'm definitely excited to see how this plays out for travel. I think there's a lot of use cases for travel.
I think even from a marketing standpoint, there's a huge this thing around content, and people say, hey, search is going to be dead. I'm like, are we predicting it too early? Is my point around there. But a friend of mine and I were discussing, and we were like, hey, this is just the first year of AI, Gen AI, right? And we don't know, and like people like, let's say, content platforms, and there are certain platforms which have significantly, like I was looking at a graph from Stack Overflow, right? Like where there's a significant drop in the number of queries and the number of page views, right? And looks like there's one industry that's going to get affected. So I think just going back from a career standpoint, Aditya, right? Like you came from a private equity background. Obviously, there's no like perfect route, right? Like, I mean, every like there are different routes to becoming a CFO, right? But what do you think are like good advantages of being from a particular background or being from a like particular like a line rather than say private equity or even from private equity, Aditya?
Yeah, see, I think generally companies and teams benefit from a diversity of experience. And that's why you see that the best teams, the best leadership teams, the best CXO teams will have a combination of people who are there from that industry, in some cases who have been there in the same company for a very long time, and people who have come in from outside. I think it's always beneficial to get that diversity of perspective. An outsider's view, right, can also help the team think about a problem in a very different manner from how they may have been looking at it. But I would say that specifically, right, coming from a private equity background helped me navigate the time period that we went through as Cleartrip, right? I've obviously talked about COVID and Flipkart, but we also actually, before that happened, we were also expanding geographically, and we did a very large acquisition in the Middle East. So I think coming in from that investment background helped me in the M&A stakes, helped me when we were looking to find a buyer, helped me when we were looking to do fundraising. So maybe it's a matter also, like I was saying, right? Also looks at if some of these events are likely to happen in the journey of the company, and when they are looking at a candidate, whether those skills are present or not. But in general, I would say industry and domain knowledge helps. Somebody who has been, say, in travel or who has been in consumer internet, they bring a certain different skill set, which is again useful. So all of these things can be picked up over time. It's more about what an individual brings to the table at the time of their joining, and then a lot of these things obviously get you can pick up on the job as well.
And I think you also touched upon like just having a very strong team to, I think, because most of the times, right, like, I mean, especially for a leader, I think the team also makes the leader and the leader makes the team, right? What are like for all the VPs or the financial directors or the controllers in the room, Aditya, what are your thoughts on just like building an ACE team, or like how do you go about it, or what sort of skill sets do you look for, Aditya?
Yeah, so like I was referring to it earlier, one of the big changes when I moved from private equity into a corporate role was the size of the teams, right? From being part of very small teams, 10 people, 12 people, to now working in a larger organization where, say, the finance org itself is close to 100 people. I think so that was a learning for me as well, in terms of how you gel with a larger team. What are the pros? What are the cons? There are definitely both pros and cons, right? Within a smaller team, you can be much tighter knit. In a larger team, obviously, getting to know everybody is as well is not going to be possible always. But that is one of the learnings that when I look around me at some of the other leaders in the organization or in the industry, one thing which is very consistent is that they are all great at team building. They've all built very, very good teams, and they are very, very good at delegation, right? So I think that has been one learning, that if you can build a good team, half your job is done, or more than half your job is done, because then you can really expand your bandwidth. You can really take up a lot more than you would otherwise be able to do. I think when building team, again, diversity is very important. Getting diverse perspectives, people from different backgrounds, different industries, different personal backgrounds as well. I think it really helps. It brings a much more healthier discussion when the teams are discussing key critical issues. Being able to delegate, that's very important. And being able to plan for succession also, right, at every level. I think that's also very, very important. You should, I always try and hire people who are much smarter than me and much stronger than me. And that always helps. It takes a little bit of getting used to. It takes a little bit of maybe initially, at least for me, I can speak that sometimes you can feel a little bit insecure. But once you overcome that, you realize that that's better for you personally as well as for the company.
Right. No, I think I remember reading this blog around from, I think, First Round Capital, where they call, when the company is growing, you'll have to give away your Lego blocks, right? Like, I mean, initially you'll have like the entire Lego blocks will be with you and you're trying to build a company. But then sometimes you'll have to pick up those limited Lego blocks and just build a bigger, or a better this thing. So I can imagine that. How big is the team today, Aditya? Like, I mean, from a finance function standpoint.
Yeah, so we are across the org. We are about 80 odd people in the finance org across different functions, which includes business partnering, which includes audit, controllership, taxation.
Got it. And I think I'm gonna probably just because of the Cleartrip Flipkart acquisition, right? Probably what are some good lessons, or probably something that you should, for all the finance leaders to keep in mind, right? Like I think for when they're probably evaluating, or especially this year looks like a year where they're going to be I mean, though there might not be a lot of appetite for it, but looks like companies are looking for good acquisitions to happen. What are your just a couple of advices or thoughts around that?
Yeah, so Nivas, I have been on both sides of the table, right? So we acquired a company in the Middle East, and we obviously got acquired by Flipkart. So I think one of the key pieces of advice would be that we should never underestimate the challenges in integration. I think companies, as they grow, they develop a life of their own, they develop a personality of their own. In many cases, they develop a lingo of their own as well, right? And two companies coming together, we should never underestimate. It's two different cultures in many cases coming together. People who have been used to working in different ways, who have been, obviously, it leads to changes in roles, changes in responsibilities, changes in reporting relationships. It leads to sometimes some restructuring as well. All of that is there. But I think the biggest challenge is that getting those different cultures together, that's a very tough thing to do. And it should be planned very well in advance, of the actual transaction closure. I think we did a 100-day plan. We did all of that. We engaged consultants to help us with that. But it requires a lot of work. It requires a lot of conscious effort to get it right. It's never easy to get it right. I think that we have done a good job. I think, and I'm really thankful to the team here in Flipkart as well. But I think we've done a very good job, and that has really enabled, right? The reason the transaction happens is because obviously leaders identify some synergies, etc. But to realize those synergies, that people aspect should never be underestimated.
Absolutely. I think previously I used to be at Freshworks, and we actually were part of an acquisition that came into Freshworks. And initially, for me, I was fairly young when the acquisition happened, and I thought, okay, you know what? Yeah, we're going into a new company, but I just realized how difficult it is for them to also accept us. Plus, at the same time, for us to also accept a new culture and kind of gel along. But I think beyond culture, probably as an employee, we see the culture standpoint, but I think there's just a lot more from a perspective as well. I think just one question here. Obviously, it's more of a what's your view on whether online platforms will consider digital currency? If yes, why? If not, if no, why not? Is a question, Aditya.
See, I think they will. I think online platforms are a part of the wider economy, and in some cases they will be leaders in adopting new technology. In some cases, the wider market will adopt, and some of the online platforms will follow. But they are correlated, they are linked to each other. And if there is, see, from our perspective, right, we want to make it as easy as possible for customers to come and transact with us, come and use our platform and do transactions on our platform. So if we feel that adopting digital currencies helps with that, it gives you obviously need to strike a balance between providing a wide range of payment options and striking and maintaining that simplicity and maintaining a flow which is not too confusing for the customer. So we always evaluate those things. But the moment we feel that any such option has potential for high adoption, we would definitely be adopting that. And I would assume that holds true for online platforms in general.
Right. I think just picking on trends, right? Like you spoke about, like, because if Cleartrip, or even I remember Myntra making an announcement, right? Like saying, hey, we're going to go mobile only, right? And I was like, wow, that's a bold move, right? Like, and today I do most of my, like, let's say, like e-commerce, either, like, I don't think I pick up my laptop to place an order online, and it's mostly on, but I think when some people have to probably take a very bold step, I think Myntra was also criticized at that point, saying, hey, why are you letting go of the web business? But yeah, sometimes you just have to take certain bold calls. Yeah, just depends on which is the call that you.
So that's a great example, right? I think that's an example where I would say, so ultimately I understand, and this was done by Flipkart, I think, and maybe Myntra as well.
Correct.
And then they ultimately went back, and they went back to desktop as well.
Right.
And even then it was a massive success, because what that move did was it changed, or it got the organization at large to really focus on mobile as a channel versus thinking of it as an extension of desktop. Right. It got the whole organization to buy into the fact that this is a different platform, it requires a different mindset, and it needs to be a success. Right. And that really helped. So even though eventually they decided that, and this is obviously well before I became part of Flipkart, but when they decided that they still need desktop as a channel, it was still a very successful move rather than them rolling back because it didn't work.
Got it. So I think we have a question from I think they've made it an anonymous question. But hi, Aditya, to move from a financial controller to a CFO position, what skills are required in addition to core controllership skills, like good technical knowledge and leadership? Do founders prefer a CFO with controllership background or a business finance background?
Yeah, I think so. Controllership gives you a lot of solid experience in some of the core skills, right, which are very, very important in the CFO role as well. So it makes you very, very strong in your fundamentals. You have a very, very good understanding of numbers. You have a very good understanding of accounts, of financials, and you have a very good understanding of how to keep a very tight grasp on numbers. All of these are essential skills if you want to become a CFO. In addition, I think as a controller or somebody working in a controllership team, maybe the areas where you will need to actively work upon, which is not naturally a part of your role as a controller, would be to partner with business, because I think both those aspects are very, very important in a CFO role. Business partnering, being able to think strategically, being able to think about business outcomes rather than accounting numbers, compliance, and so on. All of those remain important. But as a CFO or as a CXO, you are expected to deliver business outcomes as well. So that is one area where people will need to prove themselves or actively work on getting those skills. I don't think there's necessarily preference for one cohort or the other, because both set of skills are required, both set of skills are essential, and both will need to be demonstrated, I think, to be able to make this job a success.
Got it. And we have one question from Pritesh. We have like a couple of questions coming in pretty quickly. What are some offbeat KPIs or metrics that you can differentiate Cleartrip from any other business in the space? I think it is. So what are some offbeat KPIs or metrics on how you can differentiate Cleartrip from any other business in the space? Or maybe if you could just give us a brief on what metrics does like the CFO of Cleartrip look at, right? Like, just for my understanding as well, but I think also some other metrics that you look at, hey, how are we doing better, or things like that. Aditya.
Yeah, I think there are the standard metrics. I think especially in any consumer internet business, you look at the entire funnel. So you start from there, right? You start from the customer and you try and see how many customers are you able to attract on your platform? What channels are they coming from? And how many of those are you able to convert at different parts of the funnel, right, into ultimately becoming transacting paying customers. So we track all of that very, very closely. We like to obviously, within finance and as a CFO, I like to look at the unit economics very, very closely. So I think sometimes we can get lost in large aggregate numbers, and it always helps to strip down everything into the basics that on a particular transaction, how are you doing as a company, and look at it all the way down to the P&L. And we try and apply that, right, for every different product, every different construct, every different program, every different campaign that we run. That really helps in stripping everything down to sort of the base level, and it helps us in making the right decisions. Again, none of this is rocket science, and I don't think it answers that first question around what out of the box metrics that we look at. But yeah, I think some of these, if you can get some of these core vanilla metrics right, then you're in good shape.
Right. Hey, Aditya, so I think the next three questions are a little controversial questions in different angles, but feel free to, if you feel, hey, I might not be in the position to answer, feel free to, refuse. But so we have a question on, is Cleartrip collaborating with the government of India in ensuring affordable flight experiences? I think I'd probably, how I see this is, hey, especially when you have like the government of India or like a couple of regulating bodies involved, right? How does that have to work with for someone like a Cleartrip? Aditya.
Yeah, sure. See, as an industry participant, we are part of what's happening, and obviously we work in an industry where there is government, there is regulation. A lot of the growth of the industry is linked to what the government is doing in terms of airport expansion and so on. We would not directly be involved in, for example, we do work with some tourism boards, but that is the extent of direct involvement we would have with the government body. In case of travel, especially flights, right, the government has been running Udan, which is sort of a scheme to increase the pace of adoption of air travel in smaller towns, tier 2, tier 3 towns, and so on. That has been a big success for the plan for the industry, and we play an enabling role, right? So what we would do is that we know which customers are located where, and we have access, obviously, through our Flipkart relationship to a lot of these customers as well. So we take advantage of that to make sure that the customer is getting that information. They are able to see that these options are available. We work very closely with airlines when they are launching flights on some of these routes to make sure that awareness can be built. We have that two-way exchange, right, where we will pass back some of this information, some of the wider industry level data that we are seeing, industry level trends that we are seeing. We pass that back to our airline partners and supplier partners, and that allows them also to invest in some of these areas where they can also see the business logic and the commercial benefit of participating in that. So that would be the extent of our involvement, I would say, not beyond that.
Got it. Aditya, so I'm going to very very carefully not name the competitor, but I think they're saying, hey, Dash is one of the biggest competitors for your business, because I don't want an article tomorrow saying, hey, you know what, the CFO of Cleartrip made this comment or things like that. I'm presuming there should be a huge investment discussion around sales to get a bigger pie for this industry. While deciding on the growth investment, what one metric do you always watch for? And what's your advice on maintaining balance between business and finance? How do you approach it, Aditya?
Yeah, I'll maybe start with the last part, right? So I would always say business first. So we are there, we are part of a business, we are there to run business. I would say, like I said, a CFO role or a CXO role is a business leader role, irrespective of function, irrespective of domain, be it a CMO, CTO, CFO. So it's always business first, the way I look at it. And for the larger team as well, right? When I'm speaking to, say, the business finance team, or the controllership team, or any of the other teams within finance, I'm very clear that we are support functions and we are there to support business. So always business first. Coming back to the question around, so there are large competitors and there will continue to be large competitors. I think travel is a space which attracts a lot of competition, right? It attracts, obviously there are vertical specialized OTAs who are there, who've been there for a long time. And it's also attracting large e-commerce players, large horizontal players, payment platforms, etc., are getting into travel. And at the same time, we are also getting disrupted by startups, right? So I think competition is there, which tells me that people think that this industry has bright prospects. So it's good news, I would say. I think we need to keep re-evaluating our strategy at any given point of time, given that we need to be able to respond to some of these industry dynamics and industry changes. We need to make investment in sales. We need to make investment in marketing. And we always look at ROI, right? That's the best metric for resource allocation. I think one of the things I didn't mention, maybe one of the questions that you had asked around the skill sets, resource allocation, right? That's probably one of the key roles that, or key skill sets that you require as a finance leader, be it as a CFO or any other finance leader. And resource allocation, for that, ROI is probably the best metric, where you try to look at, and you try to take depending on the type of investment, size of investment, sometimes you look at a short-term return, sometimes you take a medium to longer term view. Sometimes it may be dilutive in the short term, but it still makes sense in the medium to long term to be able to invest that, to make that investment and generate returns over a period of time.
Got it. Aditya, so I'm going to switch gears a little and just ask one question around, especially as we progress in career, right? Like I think this was from a YouTube video or something of that side, right? Like literally exchanging time for money, right? I mean, because you're going to let go of more of your time, or you could take it back, but because when you take up more responsibilities, probably the Indian assumption is that, or the usual assumption is that, hey, because I'm taking up more responsibility, I'll have to give up more of my time because I'm getting paid better or getting paid more. How do you generally strike a balance, both from a health standpoint or just from be it a fitness or whatever it may be, Aditya? I think probably one of the things that we read was you're fairly from a fitness standpoint. So yeah, would love to hear your perspective on that as well.
I don't know where you read that, but yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that as a compliment. Yeah. No, I think you're right. So I think it's a conscious choice that each of us need to make at each stage of our career, and we need to strike that right balance between work, between personal interests, fitness, family, and I think in general, if you have your priorities right, where you know how much each of these things is important for you, you should be able to strike that balance. In general, what I've seen is that the more you progress in your career, right, you are maybe you get more clarity about the importance of some of these things, and you need to work on some of these things because you're older, fitness is more important, and so on. You're able to devote more time. So I would say that it is something that has not been a challenge. I think I have very clear demarcation, right, in terms of where I want to spend my time. Obviously, as a leader, you still own the responsibility, right? You are still the owner of the outcomes. That never goes away, which means that you can never take the position that, okay, I'm not going to look at this at this point of time because I'm doing something else. I think that ownership then never goes away. But you can, within those boundaries, you can still try and take out time, and you can take out time for other things that are important for you. The responsibilities increase, but I would not correlate that with time, because obviously if you have a good team, and we are going back to that, if you have a good, strong team, uh, you should be able to take on more responsibilities without having to disproportionately impact your personal lives.
No, makes a lot of sense. I think the one thing that I'm going to take away from there is, as we progress in career, that's when you realize more on the importance of like health and things like that. We have a good question. I think I'm going to combine two of the questions here, Aditya, because there are actually a lot of questions coming our way. But just with the interest of time, I'm just going to combine some of them. So I think given the current macroeconomic scenario, are there like a set of cost-saving techniques you're following, or you would advise for companies to be more prudential about?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things I look at is that whenever I'm looking at costs, it's very important to identify the nature of the cost, right? And very simply, right? And all finance professionals on this call, so maybe I'm dumbing it down, but is it a variable cost or is it a fixed cost? And generally, as you are building up a business or building up a product or building up a category, building up a campaign, you want to keep obviously your fixed costs low till you are sure about the scale that you can reach, whether that scale can justify and absorb that kind of a fixed cost. So can you variabilize your costs? I think that is one key thing to look at. And at the same time, the flip side of that, right? The corollary of that is that you don't want to compromise on your variable costs, right? Because that is your core unit economics. If your variable costs are very high, then achieving profitability or achieving break even is always going to be much, much more difficult. So that balance between fixed and variable costs and that flexibility between the two is very important. Secondly, and maybe this applies to companies that have been there for some time and they keep growing. Costs have this tendency of just accumulating, right? Typically, when we are doing our budget planning, our AOP exercises, it's very easy to fall into the trap of looking at, okay, I'm spending X this year, next year it will grow by 5%, 10%, which makes sense. As a business, I'm growing faster than that, so my overall P&L is improving. I think we should keep questioning each cost, what we had learned as zero-based budgeting, right? So obviously we don't enforce that very strictly, but that mindset is very important, that when looking at costs, not just look at change in the cost, but look at the cost in its totality as well, whether it's still making sense, whether it can be done better, and so on.
Right. And I think I'm going to very shamelessly plug in. I mean, I obviously did not plan that question or did not plant that question.
I believe you.
But yeah, I think I just realized I did not even tell you what Spendflo does. Spendflo helps companies optimize on their SaaS spends. We've been working with a lot of the Indian unicorns as well as like larger companies to be able to help them optimize on their SaaS spends. And I think again, I'm going to be very honest. I did not plant it that way, but if you are interested to know more about Spendflo, this was just well timed. I think whoever planted or whoever sent across that question, I think thank you so much for it. So I've just launched a quick poll. If you are interested to hear more about Spendflo, feel free. This webinar, or this entire thing is being brought to you by Spendflo. So I'd at least want, I think if you are interested to hear more about Spendflo. So Aditya, just as the poll is going on, I think first of all, right, like I've even also forgot that This was the webinar where we had 450 odd registrations. And I think at the max, we had about 90 or 95 odd people, close to 100 people attending. And even now, I'm seeing about 90, 80, 85 people in attendance. I think you were a little nervous in the beginning of the webinar where you said, hey, you made me more nervous, but I think I totally loved the answers. I'm going to probably leave the audience with maybe just two questions, right? I know I don't want to sound a little textbookish when I say this, but anything that, hey, these are good books, or these are good references, or these are good resources that I really look up to. It need not be just in finance, but also in business leadership or anything. And also like just about mentorship or peer network, right? Like, how do you go about that, Aditya?
Yeah, so I can talk about myself. I used to be an avid reader. I think in the last few years, again, I don't want to blame time for it. You can always take time out if you really want to do something. But in the last few years, my reading habit has unfortunately come down. I want to pick it up again. But one thing I have always done, and I continue to do, is I have a certain set of publications, both Indian and global, that I read religiously. And if I may name a couple here, I think The Economist is something that I've been reading probably for more than a decade now, and I find that very, very useful. But in general, having a wider and having a global perspective, I think really helps. And it can be any other publication, right? There are lots of good ones out there. But this is generic, it covers business, it covers economy, and it gives a different perspective, right? So I found that useful even from my private equity days, and I continue to find that very useful. And likewise, there are a few global publications that I keep going back to from time to time. So that is something that I have been doing quite regularly. Obviously, now I'm in travel, so I follow travel news, travel publications very, very closely. And it helps, right? Because there are different things that are happening in the sector in different parts of the world at any given point of time. Most of those will not be sort of actionable pieces of information, but it all sort of sticks in your mind, right? And it helps maybe in some situations when you are faced with something where you can remember something that you had read. So I would definitely encourage people to read, be it books, be it periodicals, and so on, remain up to date on your area of specialization, your sector, as well as the wider business world. So I think that's something. Mentorship, again, I don't do something very actively, but I think it is something that is almost ingrained, where at in any given interaction, right? Maybe subconsciously always trying to pick up cues in terms of seeing what makes somebody successful, what makes somebody less successful as well, what to learn in terms of things to do and things not to do in all my interactions. For me, like I had mentioned, moving from private equity to a corporate role was a big change, and I continue to have mentors, right, from both worlds, and obviously the worlds collide, the worlds overlap. But there are people from private equity funds that I've worked with, who I remain in touch with. They are some of my best friends and mentors and sounding boards. And likewise, right, I've developed similar equations with people in the business world as well.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Aditya. I totally loved it. And I'm pretty sure, I think we just had a bunch of questions going on and on, but just that with due respect to time and with the interest of time, I just had to cut it short over there. But was such a pleasure hosting you. And thank you once again for joining us for this webinar, Aditya.
No, thank you so much, Nivas, and thanks to the entire Spendflo team. I have really enjoyed this interaction. Lots of interesting questions, and yeah, thanks again for having me here.
Thank you so much, Aditya. Thanks, folks, for joining us in. And we look forward to seeing you all again in yet another episode of The Journey to CFO. Thank you.